Alright, gather around kids, we're going to show you how to make figure escapes in your hand paws. Okay, this is the other paw of those. This is my personal pair of paws, and I have the bottom here where I've done everything except stuff the paw pads. And when I sewed on the fingers, I left a gap in between. So this gap is, as long as you want to make it, this one's probably, these sometimes are a little bit too long, and you could just sew the edges up a little bit more later. But that's how you want to leave it, because that's where your fingers are going to go through. So then I have the lining, which is cotton. I like to use cotton as a lining because it's very comfortable and it's washable. You want to pre-wash your cotton and then cut out the fingers like a little cheap glove shape, and then I just straight stitch all around. Make sure that you can get at least 2 fingers in to each of, make sure you can get at least 2 fingers into each one of these, because you don't know how you're eventually going to put your fingers in. And then you want to decide exactly where you want your finger escapes placed, which means you need to have your lining in exactly the right place, and then make sure that you clip them down at the fingers. This is all bunchy because there are actually some clips there I'm going to show you, and this one's not pinned because this one's actually done, so I can show you it. So once you have your lining clipped where you want, you flip this over, make sure everything's nice and neat and straight, and you take a pencil and be real careful, because you probably can see I got some graphite on the white fabric here, which is very irritating to me. I can clean that off, and these are my personal paws, so it's not as big a deal as it would be if this was for a client. But just be aware, if you're using light colored fabric, you might not want to use a pencil. You might want to use like a friction pin or a fabric pin, where eventually it will just, the line will just fade on its own. But you want to get down in here with whatever you mark it with, and you just go side to side and make a mark on the lining where exactly this hole goes. And then you take that, you can see I made a couple of false starts here before I had it adjusted the way I wanted it. Take a sharp pair of scissors and you clip exactly where the line is. You want a sharp pair of scissors, because the neater that line is, or the neater the cut, the neater your sewing will be. Don't go through both sides, just the first side, so be a little bit careful with that. So then you want to start your sewing, and you want to start from the bottom so you can keep the tops clipped. So you move it like this, and you do a very simple but very small blanket stitch, just like you would for any marking. But keep in mind, you don't want the seam to be visible if somebody is looking at your paws, and you also don't want to feel it with your fingers when you're using your paws. So you want the seam to be on the inside where it is here, which means that you have to get the fabric clipped like this instead of what is more easy to start with, where you would just like sew it together like this, ta-da-da, so. You also want to start with the middle fingers and not the edges, because otherwise you won't be able to get up here once these are sewn down. It's just going to be really impossible. So make sure, because cotton does kind of unravel, you can see right here, you don't want to sew so close to the edge that the fabric will unravel and the threads will pull through eventually. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that you don't leave so much of a seam allowance that you can't get your fingers through later. So it's kind of, I don't know how well you can see this. Let me take a look here. This one's probably more visible. You want the stitches to be very close together and as neat as possible, and to come down there. Can you see my stitching? So you do this side first, where I've got it clipped, and then you can tie that off and then start on the other side, or what I do is usually like make a little knot and then come on the other side, clip it, pull the needle through here, sew a couple of stitches on the sides if I need to, sew this up if it doesn't quite match, just, you know, make everything neat and tidy. Then do the same thing along here. close it up over here, and then knot it off, and then you do the rest of them. So, and basically at that point, everything's unclipped, and the only seams holding the lining to the paws are on the finger escapes. Make sure, absolutely sure, that you are not sewing through both sides of the fabric either. And then, what I like to do to keep the fingers in place is to just do a little whip stitch at the top to hold them in place, and that's all you need, because the rest of the sewing to put the paws together, it's really very much like magic, especially since you should be putting a cuff of some kind that's going to catch this fabric and hold it in place around the cuff. You don't have to worry about sewing it anywhere else. It's just fine, and then you will have finger escapes, which is kind of amazing.